Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. This recording is specifically being created for the GSACS convention I'm sorry that we can't be together, that we're doing this distance, but I hope that you get some helpful things out of this workshop. This workshop is condensed partially because of the time frame that Shannon asked for us to work within, but also partially because we took some information from it and put it in a separate workshop. So Jeff created a recording for you that explains to you how to access your scores on the Iowa assessments, and then how to evaluate them a little bit. And then what I'm going to provide in this workshop is how to improve your scores in the reading comprehension areas specifically. So we have found on the Iowa assessments that our schools are doing poorly in reading comprehension on the Iowa assessments. And so I want to give you some strategies that you can use to help your students do better, not only on the Iowa assessments, but really in life. Reading is a super important skill. As an English teacher, I might say it's the most important skill, but we are people of the book. We believe the written word is incredibly important, and so we want our students to be able to read with comprehension. So what I'm going to give to you today are some strategies that work with 5 specific areas where we saw weaknesses in AACS schools. You will be selecting the ones that work best for you, for your subject area. These don't have to be used just in English class. They could be used in any class. Science, history, current events, health, any place where you're reading. You need good reading comprehension. On your handout and here at the beginning of the session, I did want to point out the sources that I used. These are not ideas original to me. They come from 2 primary sources: Close Reading of Informational Sources, Assessment-Driven Instruction in Grades 3 through 8. This book contains a lot of complete strategies, in other words, maybe full lesson plans that you might use for a whole series of instructional techniques to teach your students the way to do this and then to make application. Usually they start with you instructing them, and then there is you demonstrating with the class, then you divide them in pairs, and in the end they're working on their own on these techniques. So you could take quite a bit of time and really get them to understand and use the techniques. Reading strategies is a lot more graphic in the techniques and the tips that they give, and that's very helpful. Our students today are very visual. And then another source, the last one listed there, readwritethink.org, had tons of ideas, really good ideas. There just wasn't enough time to include all of the great ideas that are out there, and you'll find stuff from other teachers. And I think once you get started, you'll see that there's a lot to do. The first area that we're going to talk about is vocabulary. Vocabulary is obviously something we use in every subject, every area, every field of study has its own language, its own vocabulary. You might call them terms in science class instead of vocabulary. But I think one of the problems we have here is that our students are learning specific word definition pairs, and they're not learning how to determine the meaning from context. And you'll notice the standard is use context to determine meaning. So for 3rd grade, this is use context to determine or clarify the meaning of unfamiliar or multiple meaning words. In 3rd through 5th grade, it's identify and explain the meaning of common idioms, adages, and other sayings. And in 6th through 8th grade, it's determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, including figurative, connotative, and technical meanings. So let me show you some techniques you can use. The first one here, you might take this context clue types and you might use it as a poster on your wall. You might give your students a bookmark that they would use in there at their desks, but a way to help them remember these. You might teach each one of these in small mini lessons with illustrations, samples. You might do them in pairs or triplets or something. And as they become more familiar with them, then you would be expecting them to use them. You might, as a way of drilling this or teaching this or reinforcing this, you might say, Okay, pretend you don't know the meaning of such and such a word. What technique could you use to find it here? Sometimes they don't know the meaning of such and such a word. But is there a definition? Are there synonyms? Are there comparisons? I want you to notice number 7 there, visual clues. Your textbook publishers have spent a lot of time creating visual clues today. Our students are very visual. And so there might be a comic on the page or a graphic that's helping them understand the definition. So they don't want to ignore that when they're trying to figure out what the author's talking about. Another technique that you could use, and this is from the other source that uses more visual graphic illustrations. Synonyms will use the word and. She was calm, cool, and collected. Let's suppose your students don't know what it means to be collected. Well, that word and is going to help them realize it's the same as calm and cool, which are words they do know. Or if the word's an antonym, the word but might show that it's an antonym or needs more description. On exam day, he was nervous but ready. What does it mean to be nervous? Well, it's but ready. There's a little contrast going there. He was mature but in touch with his innocent side. There's a contrast between mature and innocent. They're opposites, they're antonyms. So you're showing them here. Watch for the little words. They give you clues. Here's another little word illustration. Look for the linking words. There are linking words that show that things are different. They are unlike, but not, opposite of, different. And here's an illustration. Unlike Melissa, who was patient and kind, her mother had a quick temper. So we have unlike. What's it mean to have a quick temper? Well, it's unlike being patient and kind. It's different. Similar words you would be looking for such, and, is, or, also. Those who were diligent, such as Isabel and Marcus, seem to never tire of doing more and working harder. So their diligent is the same as working hard and doing more. So that similar, that such as word. Here's a graphic organizer for the words that have multiple meanings. You remember that was a 3rd grade part of the standard. So they know what it means. She forced me to do it. I didn't want to. But what is the force of gravity? It's the use of the word to show pressure. She pressured me to do it. She made me. Gravity makes things fall. So you help them to see that words can have more than one meaning and even help them work on that in a more simplified way. Second section is the author's craft. How does the author organize things, use things? And this is going to grow, and their understanding is going to grow as they go through school. And so here are 2 standards, 3rd through 5th grade. Describe the overall structure in a text, including the logical connection between particular sentences and paragraphs. Example, chronology, comparison, cause and effect, problem and solution. Or, for 6th through 8th grade, analyze how a particular sentence, chapter, scene, or stanza fits into the overall structure of a text and contributes to the development of the theme, setting, or plot. Let me give you some ways to teach this. This is similar to the bookmark we talked about in the earliest illustration on vocabulary. There are 5 ways an author might structure a work, and that's going to help the student figure out what the author's up to. Descriptive, sequence or chronology or narrative. This is probably one you'd use a lot in your reading textbook, but also in history. Comparison, cause effect, that would get used a lot in science and history, or problem solution. And you help them understand what these mean and then show them lots of illustrations and then have them point out illustrations to you. This one, which is very similar to the previous one, the first one was on structure. The second one is on purpose. What was the author's purpose? They used an acronym for this: PRIDE, persuade, recount, instruct, describe, explain. So both the structure and the purpose can help the students get to what the author's saying. You're going to teach them these, give them illustrations, maybe do them in pairs. So first you're going to do lots of illustrations of persuade, then maybe a lot of recount or retelling the story. And then you're going to ask them as they're reading, how was this paragraph? How was this section organized? What was the organization of this newspaper article, whatever you're working on? Here are some graphic organizers. I love these. I think these are really great. So the first one is for description. The author gives the main idea and then details. Some key words to look for are, for example, one reason is like, for instance. And the graphic organizers are put the main idea there in the box and bullet pointed underneath. Very simple. Outlining really is what we're talking about here. The next one uses the main idea in a box and then the supporting ideas underneath it. And the third one, which looks like a spider web. So the main idea is in the middle with the spokes of the wheel going off of it. And the students would be filling these in, making them themselves as they were reading to help them get to the main idea. Cause and effect, this one would you look for words like consequently, if then, reason, since, because, this led to. This graphic organizer is pretty simple. The cause led to the effect. And perhaps these are the easiest ones for students to understand. A fourth graphic organizer you could use would be the comparison contrast. Graphic organizers, you're going to be looking words like both, same, different, either, although, less, more, so forth. And the graphic organizers would be your typical Venn diagram where you're organizing two things and you're showing where they have similarities, where they overlap there and where they don't. And then the other one would be your typical T-chart where you just list this thing is this thing is that. There's a great way to study the Bible. When you're reading in Proverbs, you're going to see a lot of contrast between the righteous and the wicked, the wise and the unwise. So it's a good technique. Sequence, might use these with order of instructions, how things happened in history, in a story that you're reading. And you're going to look for numbering words first, next, then, finally. And you're going to number them, or you're going to create basically a map there they're showing. And here are all four of them on the same page, which just to help you see that you could have these as posters on your wall too. And you could say, which one should we use for this paragraph? What do you think? And help them. The next area that we want to talk about is implicit meaning. And this is the ability to draw conclusions or make inferences, the so what of what's happening. In grade 3, we also scored low on make predictions, discern traits, feelings, or motives. The standard is cite textual evidence to support inferences or conclusions drawn from a text. I wanted to pause here and say cite evidence. It's sometimes hard as a teacher, you ask the kids, what do you think? Or what was the author trying to say? And you get this really, crazy idea from a kid and you're like, okay, well, what else could the author be saying? And you're trying to get them to make sense, to make the right sense out of it. So this cite evidence is a really good technique. It's also important. So tell me how you know this from what the author said. Where is that in the text? But because it's a clue, it's an inference, they're going to have to work at it. So I want to go through a really good illustration here. This one actually comes from the Stanford booklet. This was a prep booklet. It's not from the SAT 10 test. It's from a comprehension activity booklet. So I just wanted to read it to you quickly and then ask you some questions. These are the kind of questions you would ask your students. They're inference questions. Ashley woke up and put on her slippers and robe and went down to the kitchen for breakfast. Her mom made her favorite dish. It was hot oatmeal with apples and cinnamon. After breakfast, Ashley put on her jeans and sweater. Then she got out her snowsuit, mittens, boots, and scarf. She was finally ready to go out and play with her friend Matthew. She and Matthew built a snow fort and made snow angels. After a fierce snowball fight, they went over to Matthew's apartment for some hot chocolate and to watch cartoons. Later in the afternoon, they colored in Matthew's new coloring book. So what you're going to do is ask some inference questions from this. The first one, you're going to have the students read this silently because that's how they would do that on a standardized test. Then after they've read it, you're going to ask them a question and you're going to model for them what you're going to be expecting of them. Then you would probably have a series of questions that they would do on their own, maybe actually marking on the piece of paper where they find their support, and then you're going to go over them together in a class. So here are the questions. And this first one again would be your model question to show them what you want. What time of year did the story take place? Does the author tell you? Are there clues? So we would say, well, it took place in the winter. But does the author ever say it took place in the winter? No. But there are clues. So what are some clues? And they would say things like slippers and hot chocolate and snowsuit and mittens and boots and scarf and building a snow fort and so forth. Those are all clues that it took place in the winter. So here's some more inference questions. Where do you think the story took place? And they would probably say up north or somewhere where the seasons change. And you would say, did the author say that? No, but again, if there's going to be snow, it has to be up north. Where else could you say it took place? And they would maybe have to think a little harder. And you could probably assume that it took place in a city as opposed to the country because Matthew lived in an apartment. So you're not only getting the answers from them, but you're getting them to give you some support for their answers. The next question, how old do you think Ashley and Matthew are? And really, I think you can tell that they're in elementary school or young. And how do you know that? Well, they made snow forts and snow angels, and they colored and watched cartoons. Those are activities of elementary age and under kids. They're probably not high schoolers, although high schoolers like to play in the snow too. And what day of the week did this happen? And they would say, well, probably on the weekend. What makes you say that? Well, they went outside and played after breakfast. They didn't go to school. So you're helping them to make inferences, and this is a great activity that you can do with any reading assignment, but you can find some specifically that you ask them to work on. The next one is key ideas, and this is identify central ideas and their support. Again, notice and their support. 3rd through 8th grade, this is determine the central message, lesson, or moral in a text and explain how it is conveyed through key details. Or in 6th through 8th grade, analyze how particular elements of a story interact. Example, how setting shapes the characters or the plot. So that you can tell it gets a little more complicated as the students progress through school. One graphic organizer here, mistakes can lead to lessons. They created a chart and they listed the title of the work, then the character's mistake, and then the possible lessons. They probably did this as they went through a unit of short stories or maybe even poems. Here's another one, at the beginning and at the end. There's a change. The story was told for a reason. What happened? Well, at the beginning, this main character was a bully, self-centered, cruel, egocentric, selfish. He teased his pen, but he's friends with Mike. But at the end, he was thoughtful, caring, friendly toward Penn, stands up to Mike. Notice the contrast. He changed who he was associating with and how he was treating people. He was kind and sensitive. And then the so were the so what. So being kind is more fulfilling than being cruel, or the best way to undo cruelty is to show kindness. So these are 2 ways to help them get to the main idea. Remember at the beginning when we talked about the little words, the and the but and alike and unless, that show us word definitions and so forth. Well, here, this strategy is actually the opposite. When you eat or make pasta, you put it in a pot of boiling water. When you're done, what do you say? The boiling water? It's the pasta, it's the guts you want. And so the same, when you're trying to find the author's main idea, their point, you're pulling out the main things and you're getting rid of all the little periphery things. And you help students to see that. The last one that we want to talk about is key ideas, and this is connect or extend ideas. And the standard is determine the main idea of a text and recount the key details and explain how they support the main idea. So it's similar to the last one, but just another technique I think that you can use. And this one I think is kind of fun. And you could do this a lot of times in your class, but here's the illustration that I chose. And it's a picture frame. So why did the author take this, or the photographer in this case, take this picture? Why were these details included? What was he about? And I think that you can really spend some time on this. You can do this a lot in history class. You could do this in science class. You can obviously do it in literature class. Why was this included? Why did the author tell this? This story, this newspaper article is only this long. This is only how much space they have. Why are these details important? We see this a lot in social media. Why these specific things? Why is this what's included? So, what are the important details? Number two, how are they connected? And how does this information help me figure out what the author's main idea is? So there's some details in this picture. We have three little boys with their eyes covered. We have a mom and a dad. We're going to assume it's a mom and a dad behind them kissing. So why these details? For example, even why the details of the, I don't know, the rustic barn-looking building? I think maybe there's some things the author's trying to tell. How are these ideas connected? What puts them all together? Well, they're clearly a family. Clearly, the boys appear to be embarrassed by their parents' affection, but I think probably the message is there's a lot of security in this. There's some great things about a family when the mom and dad love each other. And so the author portrayed a great idea by including specific details. And I think your students would enjoy bringing in their own pictures and talking about what they mean. And then again, maybe their own newspaper articles, as we talked about um, what the main idea is. Why did the author include this? Here's another graphic organizer to give the same idea. Readers develop inferences by, number one, noticing clues about the character in the text. Those are called textual clues. Number two, combining the clues with what they already know about people. This is background knowledge. We all come with different background knowledge. So that is something we bring to what we read. And then number three, state the idea or the inference. So it says plus I know equals so I think. And this is the use of strategy to develop inferences. Again, the clues are important. We can't just willy-nilly pick what we think the author means. We have to look at the clues, but we do need to pay attention to them and then combine them with what we already know. And then another strategy would be last words. I don't know what kind of student you were, but I was a student who wanted to check things off my list, so I might be tempted to read quickly, slam the book shut, and be done. Now, I love to read, so it wasn't that I was trying to be done reading, but I was trying to be done with the task. One of the techniques to teach your kids is to reread the final words and then pause and think and then say it like a lesson. So this is what I learned. This is what I see. Again, the author's last words will be very important. The conclusion and the introduction are important parts of what an author has to say. So we want our students to look at those things as they work through their assignments. In conclusion, your school will need to choose some school-identified areas that all teachers are working on. I think these should be able to be applied in history and science and Bible and current events. This is not something that just the English teacher or the language arts teacher needs to be working on. She may or he may be the person teaching these techniques, but then they should be applied across the board if our students are really going to do well on reading comprehension, not only in literature class, but throughout life as they read the Bible, as they read news articles. Some of these strategies would be scattered throughout the year. Others of them you might spend a whole week on in segments. Some strategies should be used often until they become second nature. Then you can move on to a new strategy. And these are ways of attacking what you're already doing. You're not going to need to get rid of your textbooks. The textbooks that you have are probably fine. It's just that you want to start applying some of these ideas. Ask them, how do you know this? What in the text supports this? Our students live in an information-rich society, and they must know how to take information and filter it accurately. It's part of discernment, but it starts with some basic reading techniques. Again, the resources are here for you. And I would just suggest that you might want to purchase these 2 books and use them for additional ideas. I really had to go quickly. Now, I wanted to give you an assignment to work on as a group that will help you just take a few minutes and practice this. So you will go online to the real story of Paul Revere's Bride. I gave you the hyperlink there. It's paulreverehouse.org/the-real-story/. Then as a group, create a mini lesson that employs the clue master techniques. These were the questions that require inference and support as we practiced in the story of Ashley and Matthew. I want you as a group to come up with 5 inference questions you can ask from this article online and decide which inference question you're going to begin with to demonstrate what you want the students to do, which is find support, not just make inferences. Remember that inference questions require them to read between the lines, to make some conclusions based on what they read, to do more than just, find the basic facts, but to think a little bit deeper. And then after you finish the 5 questions that you're going to create for your students, then choose one class or subject that you teach. Maybe it's science or history or reading, and commit to creating at least one mini lesson per week for the next 5 weeks that employs at least 5 inference questions, and then set up an accountability partner. So you're going to report to another teacher in your school and say, I did this in science class on Tuesday, or we did this in history when we were studying the beginning of the chapter, or we did this with this reading story or this poem. You might even show each other your inference questions. Inference questions are going to be different depending on the grade level you're teaching. And so, but all of our students need to be able to learn to make inferences. So I'd like to challenge you to do that. And I hope that the assignment kind of stimulates your thinking this way. You may, in your school, be choosing a different standard that you're going to start working on, but I thought this would be a good assignment for this particular setting. I hope that the workshop is helpful to you and that your students do learn to read between the lines, learn to make conclusions that are accurate, and that they are empowered as Christians to be able to read with discernment. Thank you.